Hello there, and welcome to Ms.RedNebula's Blanco Tips. This video will explain how to use paths in Planet Coaster, as well as a few tricks. To start with, open the Paths tool by clicking the button on the lower right side of the screen. From here, you can create a path anywhere between 4 and 10 meters wide. The length is measured in 1 to 5 times the width. So if you choose a 4-meter path and a length of 5, the path will be 20 meters in length. Other options on this menu include an angle snap of between 0 and 90 degrees. You can also turn angle snap off, which has the same effect of turning it to 0 degrees. The camera options just change how your camera behaves as you're placing paths. You can experiment with these to see which one suits your building style best. Next is Align to Grid, which is a completely different path building style that allows you to create larger plazas. It's best to create gridded paths on a flat plane, so you may need to use the terrain tools to flatten the ground first. You have to have a path to start with, and the grid will depend on the size of the path. A 4-meter path will create a 4-meter grid, for example, where a 10-meter path will create a larger grid. The size of the grid is locked once you select it. Once you have the grid selected, you can begin placing additional blocks of path pieces. The path pieces on a grid are square by default, but you can uncheck the Square Edges box to use rounded pieces, or mix and match them to get interesting effects. If the grid isn't facing the way you want, you may need to click once to start your path, and then click a second time to set the direction of the path. Once you've set the direction, you can start your grid from that. The second tab on the Paths tool is for advanced settings. Both Flatten Terrain and Tunneling are methods for paths to adjust the terrain. The phrasing's a little ambiguous, but both allow you to tunnel paths through terrain. The tunneling option digs the terrain out from under the path, so on flat ground it's a little less useful. However, on rough terrain it can be useful to allow you to place paths that would otherwise be obstructed. Flatten Terrain flattens the ground right around your path as you place it, so if you want to make a flat path through a piece of terrain, this is the way to go. The Path Supports toggle is for paths elevated off the ground. It allows you to show or hide the columns holding your path up. The Curved Slopes option allows you to curve a path while it's going up or down. If it's toggled off, the sloped path or stairs will just be straight. The rest of the options are related to how the edges of your paths appear. You can change whether your paths have curbs, railings, or both. Turning off the Curb on Ground Path option affects both normal paths and queue paths, as does the Railing on Elevated option. However, there are separate options for the railings on ground paths and ground queues. Note that there is currently no option to turn off curbs on elevated paths. There are several designs for the look of both paths and queues, and they also affect the appearance of the curbs and railings. The first button is for standard paths, the second is for natural paths. Natural paths behave very much the same as standard, but the terrain underneath will show through. You can toggle whether they have rails, but they will always have markers alongside the paths. You can elevate natural paths, but they default to the sandstone appearance when they're not on the ground. The third button is for queues. Some of the designs are the same or similar to the standard paths, and some are different designs altogether. There are a few additional differences between standard paths and queues. A queue path is narrower than a standard one, ranging between 2 to 4 meters. While you can use Align to Grid and Square Edges, you cannot connect them to make large plazas. A queue is a one-way path only, and it must start from a standard path and end at the entrance of a ride. There are a couple ways to change the elevation of a path. To create a new path starting other than ground level, hold the Shift key and then move the mouse to raise and lower the path, and then release Shift when you're happy with the location. To reset the path to ground level, simply press Shift once. You can also raise and lower paths while building them in the form of slopes and stairs. Hold the Shift key and left mouse button, and then move the mouse up or down to build a slope or stairs. This will build the path automatically, but you can also use hotkeys to go into a preview mode instead. Use the U key on your keyboard to move the path up, and the J key to move it down. Change the appearance of an existing path by selecting a new design or advanced setting such as railings, curbs, or path supports. You can then hover over an existing path and click once to change it. Finally, there are a couple ways to delete paths. As long as you have the Paths tool active, right-clicking a path will delete it. To delete a lot of paths at once, click the Delete Path button and then left-click and hold while moving over paths. You can also temporarily toggle the Delete Path option on by holding the Delete key on your keyboard. There are a number of tricks for using paths. I'll cover as many as I can, but feel free to leave any other tips you know in the comments. Number 1. If you're trying to start a new path near an existing one, it will try to connect the paths. To prevent this, hold down the Control key on your keyboard. Number 2. Sometimes path angles don't give you all the options you need. Holding down the Z key on your keyboard will offer additional options. Number 3. In addition to using Align to Grid to select an existing path, you can also use building grids. Click Select Grid, and then hover over a building piece. You'll see the message Get Grid from 4 meter path piece. Click on that to start a grid there. Number 4. You can change the surrounding of rides using the path options. You can use all path types for this: standard, natural, or queue. For coasters and track rides that have a station, choose the path style and hover over each side of the station to change its look. For flat rides, you can not only change the color of the ground beneath the ride, but you can also remove the curb and railing. If you use the natural path option, you can remove the appearance of the path and barrier around the ride completely. Number 5. I learned this trick from one of Geekism's videos. Check out the link in the upper right corner of the screen. If you want a short set of stairs, you can do so by moving a shop next to an existing path and using the Shift key to raise the shop up off the ground just slightly. A path will automatically connect. Place the shop and then delete it once again. The path stairs will remain. Number 6. Path textures follow the world grid. Most of the textures work regardless of which direction your path is going, but if you want to use the horizontal or vertical wood slats, they look best when oriented to the grid. You can also alternate them for a nice unique pattern. Number 7. If two paths are next to each other, guests will walk right across. Sometimes you need some crowd control. In the Scenery tab, go to Props and then Fences. Here, there are 2 types of item to help with this: curbs and barriers. Curbs discourage guests from crossing them, but they still will if there's no other way. Barriers are impassable no matter what, so you can plant them in walls you don't want your guests walking through. That's all I can think of for now, but I hope you found it all useful. Feel free to like or comment and leave any suggestions for quick tips or tutorials you'd like to see me do. And if you want random updates from my Planet Coaster exploits, you can subscribe too. That's all for now. Bye!